Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho. I'm very excited for my Chargers to take on the Chiefs tonight. But before that happens, let's rank some quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses for week one. At the top for QB, I think it's very obvious. I got Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen at 1 and 2. It's the best game of the week, the most likely shootout. You don't want to be missing this game. Every reason in the world to start them is there. You drafted them in the third round. You have to start Lamar and Josh Allen. I think the Ravens win, so that's why I have Lamar ranked above Allen at 1. Number 3, I did rank Jalen Hurts top 3 Thursday night, and he ran all over Dallas. Pretty obvious call there. He did pay off quite nicely. Number 4, I think we're dropping down a tier, but I do have Baker Mayfield as the 4th quarterback in my rankings this week. While he is 1 and 3 versus Atlanta, 0 and 2 on the road, in fantasy, he's averaging over 20 fantasy points per game. He doesn't have Chris Godwin, but Igbuka is fully prepared to step in. I'm definitely not worried about the Bucs scoring points. I think they will struggle to stop the Falcons' offense, but if anything, that means this game has shootout potential. I think Baker is a must start in week 1. At number 5, I also think Kyler Murray is a must start as well. On the road at the Saints, that defense might show up, but in a dome, fully healthy in week 1, it's pretty hard to envision Kyler imploding and putting up a dud. I think Trey McBride is going to look very dominant in this matchup. So while I am worried about Kyler long term, to pretend like he doesn't have top 5 upside this week would be a lie. Love Kyler in this matchup. I think he is a must start in week 1. At number 6, I am dropping down Jayden Daniels versus the Giants. Now, I'm not telling you to bench him. Quarterback 6 is definitely still in your lineup. But based on draft capital, you probably think I'm way too low here. He should be top 4 in any other week. However, if you look at last season against the Giants defense specifically, Jayden Daniels was nothing special. He only had 2 total touchdowns, and if not for 40 yards rushing, he was actually very, very mediocre in fantasy. His average was only 218 passing yards per game, and that led to just 16.7 points per game versus the Giants last year. So that is a minor red flag. The Giants also bolstered their defensive line tremendously this offseason, and I do fear this defense a little bit. I think it's actually a sneaky tough matchup overall. In division, I think it'll be more of a low-scoring game than shootout. So while I am still trusting Jayden Daniels in my lineup, to pretend like I'm overly confident after last year's rough matchups against them would be an overstatement, and I also think Terry has not had the best track record. He got locked up for less than 25 yards in both matchups last season. So Debo needs to step up. That could be a rushing touchdown that goes away from Jayden. There's just a little hesitation I have here for Daniels against the Giants. So I am bumping him down. He'll bounce back tremendously. There's a chance I'm way too low. Obviously, I could look like an idiot ranking him below Kyler and Baker, but I do think his upside is capped. I don't think Jayden has his best game of the year. So just QB6 this week. I trust the Giants' defensive matchup numbers to limit him once again. Number 7, I have Joe Burrow versus Cleveland, and Burrow is also really mediocre in his track record versus the Browns. We all know that he struggled early on in his career. He's been better as of late, but if you look at the last 5 games specifically versus the Browns, he only averages 14 points per game in fantasy, an average of 197 yards per game, 9 touchdowns in those 5 games, and 4 turnovers. That's not good. That is really nothing special. Less than 200 yards per game was a big shock when I researched it. So while maybe I'm not excited to start Burrow this week, I think you have to based on where you drafted him. Odds are you didn't heavily invest in a good backup, and odds are he does play pretty well. The fact they played in the preseason means they probably buck the trends of looking like shit in week 1. But I did take the Browns to win. However, I do think they'll win on a shootout, not on a low-scoring game. I think Burrow's still top 10. I got him at number 7. Hard to imagine you bench him in week 1. Number 8, I have Bo Nix versus Tennessee, and I did rank Bo Nix as a top 10 quarterback this season. I think he'll be a consistent staple in your lineup. And the Titans were a top 10 matchup last year. So while they did deal with a lot of injuries in the secondary, I would still trust that trend to repeat. I don't fear the Titans matchup at all. So even though L'Jarius Sneed is looking like he'll play, perhaps he locks down Sutton, I think the addition of Evan Engram covers up all those holes, and I do trust Bo Nix to offer some value in the run game as well. So the floor is really high, and as long as they don't lean on the run too heavily, I do think Bo Nix offers one of the safest floors this week in all of fantasy. I think he is a top 10 play. I would start him if I drafted him. At number 9, I'm starting Drake Maye versus Las Vegas as well. Vegas was also a top 10 matchup last year, just like the Titans. Not a spot to fear. So I do think the coaching change for New England is going to benefit Drake Maye this season. I think he's going to be a lot more consistent, fewer turnovers, and he also added 36 rushing yards per game last season. That's an underrated aspect of his fantasy profile. So love Drake Maye. I think they will beat the Raiders kind of comfortably. Unless Travion Henderson just tears it up in the run game, then Drake Maye should have a very safe floor. That rushing value keeps the ceiling in play no matter what. So love Drake Maye this week. I think the Raiders matchup is one to chase, and I do think he's a top 10 quarterback in week 1. At number 10, I think we are dropping down a tier, but I did tell you Dak Prescott was a high-end streamer going into Thursday night, and while he did look good, the run game was way more involved than I expected, and those touchdowns for Javonte Williams really hindered the upside for Dak Prescott. So although he didn't turn it over, he also didn't run it at all, and that really was not good for fantasy. He did not put up 10 points, and this ranking is going to look pretty bad. But I thought he was better than expected. I thought the Eagles matchup would be tough. Even though he didn't throw for 200 yards, the lightning delay really held him back. The drops by CeeDee Lamb really capped the upside for Dak Prescott. If he had just scored at least one touchdown, then he wouldn't have looked so atrocious. But I was definitely wrong. Ranking him top 10 was too high, and I apologize if you started him based on my ranking. But number 11, I do have Jared Goff at Green Bay, and some people have no concerns about losing Ben Johnson. I am not one of those people. And similar to Dak Prescott, Goff does not run the ball whatsoever. So you need an elite passing game and multiple touchdowns to hit the ceiling for Goff. The Packers have a legit defense in division. I think this will be more of a 21-20 low score game. I'm not expecting a full shootout in this matchup, but the Lions offense is always a potential shootout waiting to happen. So I do think he's top 12. I think the floor is safe for Goff. I would not expect to get burned, but I just don't think he'll have his best game of the year on the road at the Packers. Number 12, I also think Brock Purdy is in the streaming conversation this week at Seattle. He does have a good overall record. He's 3-0 against Seattle in the Seahawks Stadium. And in fantasy, he's actually been very consistent, an average of 21.3 points per game. But his wide receiver core is very shaky entering this matchup. I'm not sure I trust Juwan Jennings. And the fact that Christian McCaffrey is not practicing, already questionable, that's not a good sign. So this matchup, I think, is a lot more difficult than people think. The Seahawks secondary is legit. And if not for some rushing stats, I do think Purdy will be limited in fantasy, but I do think he'll have a decent floor here. I'm not dying to bench him. I think he'll be fine, but maybe not elite. I doubt he goes over 20 points, even though he is averaging 21.3 in 2 games last year versus the Mike McDonald defense. So should be fine. I'm definitely trusting the floor, but I do think the upside's a bit capped for Purdy this week. At 13 and 14, I think the Jags-Panthers game could be one of the most entertaining, high-scoring games that no one is excited to watch. But Bryce Young finished last season as a top 12 fantasy quarterback. In those final 7 games, he was actually really solid in his run game contribution. So if he can get a rushing touchdown once again in this game, I think the upside's very high. I don't fear the Jags matchup at all. They were definitely a plus matchup you wanted to chase last season. So while they did trade away Adam Thielen, I do trust Tet McMillan quite a bit. If they had Jalen Coker, I might be tempted to put Bryce in the top 10. But at 13, I do think he's a viable streamer. I do think if you have a start-sit question involving Bryce Young, it's actually going to be very tempting to start him. So I'm really excited about Bryce Young. I would like to see what this offense looks like, though, before I lock him into the must-start category. He may not offer as much rushing upside as last year. Perhaps he does have a cap ceiling. In general, he's not the safest bet. So I'm excited about Bryce Young. I do think he's top 15, but 13 is as high as I can go. I can't rank him above Brock Purdy or Jared Goff as much as I want to. At 14, I also think Trevor Lawrence is getting a boost in value here. That Panthers defense doesn't scare you that much, and I do think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be unguardable as always. So if Travis Hunter is as legit as the second overall pick capital would suggest, then I think Lawrence has very high value. I think in a super flex league, I think he's a very good start this week. I trust Liam Cohen to dial up a good game plan. So I like T-Law, I like Bryce Young. I think both quarterbacks in this Jags-Panthers game, top 15 options. At 15, I do have Jordan Love versus Detroit, and injuries in the receiving core are a bit concerning, but the division rivalry could also be a low-scoring game week 1. I don't want to dismiss that this game could be a shootout. I think there's definitely some potential for a high ceiling. So I can't drop him lower than 15, but I would prefer to know that Matthew Golden actually looks as good as I'm expecting before I fully endorse Love as a weekly starter. So can't put him in the top 10, but I think the floor is very safe. I think you're locked into at least 16 points, and there's no way where I think Love burns you. The Lions secondary is not that scary. So I wish Jayden Reed was fully healthy, but I do think Tucker Kraft can step up, and I also think Matthew Golden could look phenomenal right out the gate. So there is a chance that Jordan Love crushes this week, but against the Lions in division, I'll expect just like an average 16, 17, 18 point game out of Jordan Love. Nothing elite, but nothing that costs you a win. At 16, I also think the last quarterback I'm trying to start if I can, but probably only in a superflex format, would be Justin Fields versus Pittsburgh. I think the Steelers defense is tough, but Fields can get you 15 points just off of rushing stats alone, and I expect him to provide consistent rushing touchdowns this year. I think he'll play well in a revenge spot against the Steelers, but Steelers defense probably holds him to less than 20 points. I don't think he's elite, but I think 16, 17 points is a safe floor to bet on. I think Fields will be a reliable start. I don't think he offers much bust potential at all this season. Next up, I think we are dropping down a tier, and only in Superflex would I be trying to start these quarterbacks, but you're probably wondering, where the fuck is Patrick Mahomes in these rankings? The Brazil game is going to be weird. I'd expect some turnovers, multiple punts as well, and probably a few more field goal kicks than otherwise touchdowns that would happen if this was a home game. So while Mahomes does run, I think the floor is definitely usable. I don't think he's a top 10 quarterback this week. I do not want to be trusting him without Rashee Rice against the Chargers. It will be a tough matchup. So not going to give him the full green light. I think in a one quarterback league, I would like to bench him. If I had Bryce Young, I would happily start Young over Mahomes against the Chargers in Brazil. The Brazil setting, I think, is a big red flag, and that's why I ranked Justin Herbert at QB 18. While I am excited about him all season, I also think, similar to Mahomes, the Brazil spot is not one I'm dying to invest in. So I'm expecting a rough back and forth, low-scoring game. I see a lot of field goals in this one, and without the touchdown production, I just think, kind of like Dak Prescott last night, the upside will be capped. So while Herbert could dominate, I think his run game usage is kind of underrated. I just don't see a elite ceiling here. I think the Chiefs defense is also a matchup to ignore. Most of the time, that's a big downgrade. So the Brazil situation is just why I'm concerned. I might be dead wrong. Maybe both quarterbacks are top 5 options this week, but in my opinion, it's more likely that they're going to let you down than pay off. So at 17 and 18, no thank you with Mahomes and Herbert, unless it's a 2-quarterback superflex format. At number 19, I actually really want to rank Michael Penix in the top 10 because last year we saw Kirk Cousins absolutely torch the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I don't think it's just because Kirk Cousins has their number. I think Penix is a better quarterback than Kirk Cousins, and I do think there is a sneaky breakout performance incoming for the young guy in this matchup. I actually see Penix as a very high upside passer this season. The guy has a cannon, and Drake London has torched the Bucs pretty much every single time he's played them at home in his career. So I love the Penix to London connection this week, but Penix does not run the ball, and with Darnell Mooney banged up, Kyle Pitts still a massive question mark. odds are they lean on Bijan a little bit extra in the run game. So Penix, I think, is kind of capped because he does not run the ball. But if you told me he threw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns in this game, that would not shock me. That's what Kirk Cousins was averaging last year against the Bucs. 393 yards per game, threw 8 touchdowns, only 1 interception in his 2 division rivalry games versus Tampa. So Penix could definitely slot in as a top 10 play this week. I think in DFS, he's actually a very, very good value, one of the most underrated options on the board this week. So love his upside, but to pretend like I trust the floor would be a lie. Last year, he was not that good in fantasy if the game did not reach overtime. This game, though, could be a shootout. Penix is very, very sneaky, but in week 1, I don't think I'm willing to trust him if it's not super flex. But the upside is very high. I'm actually really excited about Penix in this game. At number 20, I'm also very excited about Joe Flacco in this game. The Bengals matchup is elite, and the old man has nothing to lose. We all know at some point the Browns are going to bench him for one of the rookie quarterbacks. So while he has the job, expect him to sling it like crazy. Even if he throws like 3 picks, he's going to be chucking it downfield all game long. We know he has a good connection with Njoku. I think Judy, Tillman, and Fannin could also contribute at a high rate. The Bengals defense not going to be able to stop anyone. So I do think Flacco does have just as high upside as Penix as well. If he drops 25 points because he throws for 303 or 4 touchdowns, that would not shock me. So week 1, I do think Flacco has some very high upside. In a 2 quarterback league, I would try and get him in the lineup. And odds are nobody drafted him. Odds are he's on the waiver wire. I don't think I'd plug him in just for the laughs, but honestly, if you do beat your opponent with Flacco, that'd be one of the most hilarious outcomes of them all. I'm not doing it, but if you are starting Flacco, please take a screenshot and send it to me at niceandblunt@gmail.com. I would happily put it into one of the videos next week and have us all laugh just because you had the balls to start Flacco, especially if you win. That would be awesome. You would be goated. So Flacco at QB 20, I think has some really high upside, but do I feel confident enough to actually start him? No, I do not. In 2 quarterback leagues, though, fire him up. I think that's pretty interesting. At QB 20, there is some value here. At 21, I got Geno Smith at New England, and I think Geno could crush this season. I think the overall stats are going to look pretty good, but if you look at his numbers on the road, especially in outdoor games, he's not that special. But the Patriots in September, weather's not a major factor, so I think he'll be all right. But to fully trust him week 1 against a tricky Mike Vrabel defense in the season opener for the Patriots, I think home field advantage will be a factor, and I do think they're going to have to go silent count with a new offensive line. The chemistry might not be elite out the gate. So I do think they could also lock up Brock Bowers, or at least double team him, try and take him away. I think Geno's going to be fine, but more so a floor play that I'm not dying to trust in week 1. I would like to see it before I trust it. I think he'll be much better in the Dome at home in Vegas. So I think he'll be ranked a lot higher next week against the Chargers, but in week 1, just QB 21 at the Patriots, not my favorite play of the week. I also don't think Caleb Williams is a very safe play either versus the Vikings week 1. Ben Johnson's offense might be hard to learn, but I do think his knowledge of the division is going to pay some dividends. So although Flores' defense can be a nightmare, I think Ben Johnson will have some answers here, but I don't think Caleb is going to be asked to do very much. I think they're going to hold him in check. The game plan will be a bit more conservative, and I don't think they're going to ask him to play Superman in order to get the win. So I think they lean on defense a bit more against a rookie quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. I don't think Caleb is going to be lights out in this matchup. They're going to ease him in just a little bit, get his confidence up, get the win before they demand him to do everything. So if not for the rushing stats, I think the floor could be very low, but Caleb does offer some run game usage. He averaged 29 rushing yards per game last year, and that does have some value. So the floor I think is safe. The ceiling I don't think is available this week. I'd like to see what this Bears offense looks like before I endorse Caleb as a must start. But QB 22 might be way too low. I think everyone in this tier 17 through 22 might actually be a lot better than I'm giving them credit for in the rankings. But the difference between QB 10 and QB 20 is often just like 2 or 3 points. There's a lot of very narrow tiebreakers in this tier, and the overall like settings for them are why I'm hesitant. I don't fully trust Caleb quite yet in this offense. Week 1 could get ugly, but after this point, I think you're benching every single player in a 2-quarterback superflex league. I'd rather probably start like a high-end running back in the flex or even top 30 receiver than anyone moving forward. But Daniel Jones, I do have at 23. It has some rushing value, but I don't really want to trust him that much. I think they could torch the Dolphins. The Dolphins don't have a great defense, but at home in week 1, I'm just not dying to do it for Daniel Jones. I doubt he moves the needle very much. So gonna pass. I think it's a little too risky. I'd rather take a shot on Penix or Flacco if I'm feeling desperate. And same goes for Tua. I don't see Tua offering any rushing value ever. And last year, he only threw for 2+ touchdowns in 5 games. Otherwise, it was always just capped at 1 touchdown. And I just don't see it. A-Chain's also banged up, and I just don't trust the Dolphins. I am not a believer in Miami at all this year. But usually Tua plays better in September as opposed to later in the year. There's a chance I'm ranking him way too low, but in general, I just want to fade all the Dolphins overall. Have no confidence, no thank you with Tagovailoa in week 1. At 25, I think CJ Stroud has some very high potential. This game could turn into a shootout, but odds are it's much more of a defensive game. And other than Nico Collins, I don't trust any other receiver just yet. So as high as I am on Jayden Higgins and even Jalen Noel, Christian Kirk is probably the week 1 wide receiver 2. And with no run game to speak of, I just don't trust the upside overall for the touchdown production for the Texans. So I do think they win, but I think it's like a 17-19 type of game. And I just don't see much upside. Stroud is always capped because he doesn't run the ball pretty much ever. So no thanks with Stroud this week. I will pass. And then Darnold, I think, is also probably a good pass this week. I think they lean more on the run game and the defense. However, I think in a revenge spot, there is some sneaky upside here. Darnold put up top 10 numbers last year, and everyone just dismisses him because he played for the Vikings. I think he does have some legit upside, but I would like to see it before I endorse it. So I kind of feel like I'm ranking him 10 spots too low, honestly, but in week 1, I will pass. This game against the Niners is probably more of a low-scoring game. At 27, 28, and 29, I do not want to start Stafford, Russell Wilson, or J.J. McCarthy. I don't trust Stafford against the Texans. The back situation is also a red flag. I don't think he's fully comfortable at this stage in time. So no thanks with Stafford. The Texans matchup's going to be a nightmare this year, so I'll bench him even though the receivers are good. I think he needs a lot of touchdowns to pay off, and I just don't see it happening. With Russell Wilson at 28, though, he started really strong last year with the Steelers when he made his debut, and it could happen again. We know he has a short leash, and he wants to remain the starter as long as possible. So he's going to hold off Jackson Dart for a while. I think this game will be competitive. I might be ranking him way too low, but no one really drafted him, and no one's ever excited to start him. I will keep him on the waiver wire and on the bench at QB 28. No thank you against Washington. And then 29, I have no desire to trust J.J. McCarthy in week 1. Jefferson notoriously gets locked up by the Bears defense, and I just don't think the Thielen TJ Hockenson connection will be enough. So if Jefferson is actually held in check, then McCarthy's really going to struggle. I need to see it before I trust it. And even if he is good, I don't see like elite potential. I don't think he'll be as good as Darnold was last year. So definitely going to bench him. I think if you want to hold on to him on the bench, be my guest. But honestly, I think he could be a waiver wire option very quickly if he doesn't prove he can play well to start the year. So no thanks with McCarthy making his rookie debut. Not excited. Not excited at all. And then Cam Ward, a rookie debut against the Broncos. That's a nightmare matchup. So as hyped as I am for his rookie season, I think he does win the division. No thank you week 1 at Denver. He will learn a lot, but make a lot of mistakes here. It's going to get ugly pretty fast. And then 31, I got Rodgers at the Jets. Rodgers does not run. The offense has few weapons you trust. I think the Jets can lock up DK Metcalf. And historically, Rodgers has been pretty rough in his last 3 season openers. So week 1, he's been bad. I actually picked the Jets to win, and I do think they lock him up. This game is going to be ugly, a defensive game, and unlike Justin Fields, there's no rushing upside to lean on. So no thank you with Rodgers, a clear must bench. And then worst quarterback this week is Spencer Rattler fuck no with Rattler forever. Moving on though, let's talk about the tight end position. And I actually have Trey McBride as my week 1 tight end 1. The lack of touchdowns last year is probably a narrative they would like to nip in the bud early on. So I do think he finds the end zone this week. And I think the volume will be elite. I think he's going to dominate. I think a 25-point game is actually in the cards for McBride this week. I do not fear the Saints defense whatsoever. I do rank him above Brock Bowers this week, although Bowers could literally be the best tight end we've ever seen in the NFL in history. When it's all said and done, I wouldn't put it past him. However, week 1 here, I do think Vrabel knows that and is going to try and take him away. I could see a Belichickian approach from this defense where they bracket and double team your best weapon and just try and take him away as best they can. I think they're going to force Geno to beat them without Bowers in this one. So while I do think Bowers is locked into your lineup, I just don't think it'll be his best game of the season. I do think McBride in the dome is a slightly better investment, but Bowers at number 2, you're nitpicking. There's no difference at the top here. So I'm definitely trusting him. I don't think he's a bad play at all. I just think McBride is slightly better. At number 3, I have George Kittle, the obvious ranking here. The only weapon that the Niners really have that you can fully trust right now. Even McCaffrey is not fully healthy. And I don't know if I fully trust Pearsall and Juwan Jennings in week 1. So I think Kittle could easily repeat as the tight end 1 in points per game like he did last year. He's a lock in your lineup. If you drafted Kittle, you must feel very excited about his season incoming. He could be the best option overall at the position. So those 3 are locks in your lineup. Then at number 4, I do have David Njoku, who last time we saw him with Flacco, Njoku was elite. He has tight end 1 upside if that connection is just as good as the last time we saw it. And the Bengals defense is definitely a good matchup to chase. So I love Njoku this week. I think he has elite upside. I'm not convinced Harold Fannin is going to be a problem in week 1. Njoku's kind of injury prone, but at this moment in time, he is fully healthy. I think Flacco will make him look phenomenal in this matchup. So love Njoku, have to start him. I think he's top 5 this week. And then TJ Hockenson, I also believe is top 5 as well. I think the volume is going to be very safe to bet on. Justin Jefferson notoriously struggles when facing Chicago on the road, and Addison is suspended. Adam Thielen only joined the team last week. The connection can't be that good with Thielen and McCarthy, so somebody needs to step up and offer that security blanket. The check down, I think, will be a big factor in this game, and I do expect those targets to go to TJ Hockenson. So I think the volume is going to carry him to a very high floor. While I'm not in love with the touchdown production, I do think 10 targets is in the cards here. I think the rhythm will be established early on for JJ McCarthy and TJ Hockenson. I think that will be his safety valve this season. And until Addison returns, I love Hockenson. I think he's a must start in your lineup the first 5 games. At number 6, I got Mark Andrews. And last time we saw him, it was rough. The drop passes are probably spinning in his head all off season. They're probably tired of that narrative. They're going to force feed him the ball, in my opinion, in the red zone specifically. They've done that a lot in the past. I think it's kind of just rinse and repeat, especially with Isaiah Likely and his foot injury. You know, Andrews is going to put up good fantasy points in the beginning of the season. That's kind of the main argument for drafting him as high as we took him. You know, he'll be used a lot to start the year. So love him this week. Tight end 6, but the yardage has not been elite for him lately. The last couple years, he's rarely going over 50 receiving yards in any given game. So the touchdown feels like a lock, but 50 yards kind of feels like a lot. I doubt it happens. 11 points, I think, is his floor, and that's definitely a tight end you want to start. Moving on, though, I think we're dropping down a tier, and Evan Engram is my tight end 7. And Sean Payton, I think, is excited to use this new weapon in this offense, especially given the matchup. L'Jarius Sneed is a good corner on the opposite side, who has locked up Cortland Sutton for less than 40 yards when he was a Chief 2 years ago. So I could see a rough game for Sutton in this one, and that means Bo Nix will need to look elsewhere. I think Evan Engram will be the reliable target he's looking for. So I think they lean on the tight end a bit extra in this game. The touchdown usually doesn't happen for Engram, but I think the yardage and volume will carry him to a top 10 finish. I think Engram is a weekly must start, and I will rank him top 10 pretty consistently until he gets hurt or until he proves you cannot trust him. I think week 1 is a spot to start him. At number 8, I have Sam LaPorta going up against the Packers, and he should still have access to a top 3 ceiling, but I got to see the new offensive coordinator in action before I rank him that way. You're not benching him, but I do think he's closer to tight end 10 this week than tight end 4. LaPorta should be fine, but sometimes without a touchdown, he's nothing special. So I'm hoping for the touchdown, but if it doesn't happen, you may get burned, may just have a mediocre showing out of LaPorta against the Packers. But in the same game, I have Tucker Kraft versus Detroit, and the Jayden Reed foot injury paired with their best wide receiver making his rookie debut. I think Kraft could actually be leaned on and have a dominant performance. I think he might be the top target by the end of the game. I would like to rank him higher, but some of his success is also pretty touchdown dependent, similar to LaPorta. If that doesn't happen, you might be kind of disappointed, and that's why I think while he is a very good start this week against Detroit, I don't think I can rank him above LaPorta or Engram. I think he should be started, but there is still the variable that maybe Luke Musgrave has a bigger role than we project. I really doubt it. That's not on the radar for me, but it's in the back of my mind. There may be another tight end to factor in, but Kraft should be really good. I think he will score a touchdown. I think I might be ranking him 5 spots too low. He might be better than Hockenson. He could be a top 5 tight end easily this week. At number 10, I have the rookie Tyler Warren making his debut against Miami. Is not a bad matchup to chase. The hype, however, feels like it's gotten a little bit out of hand over the last few weeks. The upside on Warren is definitely there, but I would like to see it before I start ranking him in the top 5. We have seen a lot of rookie tight ends disappoint, not just in week 1, but overall in their rookie season. So let's just see it work out before we vault Tyler Warren into the top 5. I think there's some veterans I trust a bit more than the rookie. Leaning on Daniel Jones is not my favorite thing to do. So just at number 10, I think he is a good starter, but on the lower end of the top 10, let's see what he has to offer before we fully endorse him every single week. At number 11, we are dropping down a tier, and I did tell you Jake Ferguson would have been a good streaming option last night, and Ferguson did let me down, no question about it, but he was targeted in the end zone on back-to-back plays from the 23-yard line. They gave him some deep shots for a touchdown. The defense was good on both of those plays, however. He did bobble one of those passes and just could not bring it down. If that would have hit, it would have been a 9-point play that would have made me look like perhaps a genius. So it just didn't happen. I think the logic for it was correct. I don't regret ranking him this high, but it did not work out. He was not as good as I expected. That touchdown would have been nice. It just did not hit, unfortunately. So Jake Ferguson, quite a letdown in week 1. I'm not that high on him on the season, so expect him to be ranked closer to like tight end 16 moving forward. He's more of a floor play in general on a weekly basis. At 12, though, I have Travis Kelce versus the Chargers, and force feeding the 35-year-old in a Brazil game is probably not the game plan. I don't think that they want him to feel extra sore on the plane ride home. So he might be a bit of a decoy, but because of the Rashee Rice suspension, that's probably not something they can afford. The volume will probably be okay, but I'm just not expecting many touchdowns in this one, and I just don't think he's going to be an elite option. So this week, he's not top 10 for me. I think they'll ease him into the offense like they did last year. First 3 weeks of the season in 2024, Travis Kelce only averaged 3.5 points per game. That could happen again. He might burn you. I wouldn't be shocked if he's a very bad option in week 1. Could get ugly pretty fast, but he has torched the Chargers in the past. I might be ranking him way too low, but week 1, you're probably starting him based on the draft capital. At 13, I have Colston Loveland versus the Vikings on Monday, and I'm really hopeful for the rookie on the season, but week 1, I don't trust Caleb Williams. It could be a very rough start, and the target share is probably too crowded to fully trust. I need to see some consistent production from any Bears pass catcher to feel really confident in trusting them on a week-to-week basis. So week 1, I think I'm going to fade him. The target rotation could be pretty random. For now, I'm not dying to invest in the rookie in his debut. So I'd rather bench him. I think Ferguson would have been a good streaming option, but odds are you don't have the best streamer possible. And at tight end 13, he's still a decent start. In a 12-team league, I would probably have Loveland in the lineup this week. But at 14, I have Dalton Kincaid versus the Ravens, and should be a very high potential outcome for him. Probably going to be a high-scoring game, but last year the floor was pretty much non-existent for Kincaid, and there are some very high-risk outcomes with the tight end, just like last year. So until he proves it, I don't think I can trust him. I would like to start him, but it just feels a little risky. I don't think I will have the balls to do it. The Bills receiving core is very crowded, and the touchdowns are kind of hard to bet on. So no thanks with Kincaid at tight end 14. I think at this point you're probably benching these guys, but one of the better streaming options outside the top 10, that is for sure. At 15, I also think Zach Ertz is kind of tempting against the Giants. I feel like he's been forgotten in this offense before, only because of his age. I think that's really the only reason why his draft capital was not higher. But last year he was a top 10 tight end. It's possible it happens again. He's a little touchdown dependent though, and last year Jayden Daniels only threw 2 total touchdowns in his 2 games versus the Giants. So could be a rough game here, could be kind of difficult. I'd probably pass on Ertz, but I do see some high upside. As always, he could find the end zone like last year. At 16 against Dallas, I did rank Dallas Goedert as a low-end streamer, but probably someone I would keep on the bench. And he was definitely much better than I expected. I was wrong about this prediction. I thought those 7 targets would have gone to A.J. Brown. Instead, Goedert got a lot of usage. However, they were all short passes, and even though he caught all 7 of his targets, 7 for 44 is not impressive at all. So unless it's full PPR, he was not like an amazing option. He was better than Jake Ferguson, I'll give him that. But even with 7 catches, I don't think he'll finish top 10 on the week. So I think the call to bench him at tight end 16 was probably the right decision. But if you did bench him in full PPR, that may not have been the wise decision. 11.5 points in full PPR is pretty usable for any tight end. So Eagles kind of shocked me. That was kind of weird, but I doubt it happens all year long. If Goddard implodes and becomes irrelevant quickly, wouldn't surprise me at all moving forward. So that one was kind of a shocker, but at tight end 16, this rank might be slightly too low. And then the rest of the way, I think you're benching all these tight ends no matter what. But at 17, honestly, I think Kyle Pitts against the Bucs has some upside here. There's literally elite upside if Darnell Mooney is just a decoy or does not play at all with that shoulder injury. Beyond London and Bijan, who else do they have? So Penix is going to try to make him look good. I think there's a chance the connection is okay, but to have any faith in Kyle Pitts is always a bad decision. I don't have much faith, but I do see some upside. Honestly, I could see some go routes turn into some big plays with Penix going to Pitts. So I'm kind of tempted, honestly, but not going to do it at tight end 17. He is outside of the start bubble. At 18, I got Cade Otton in the same game, and Otton is kind of banged up already, but with all the other injuries in their offense, there's definitely some upside. He's pretty touchdown dependent. If he doesn't score one, you're fucked. But honestly, Baker has put up a lot of touchdowns against Atlanta in the past, and one of them could easily go to Cade Otton. There'll be a lot of attention on Evans and Igbuka. Otton could get forgotten about. At 19, I have Brenton Strange of the Jaguars against Carolina, and he has some very high potential. I think the volume could actually be pretty good for him this season. Trevor Lawrence likes to throw the ball to the tight end, but Strange is not as talented as Evan Engram. So I would like to see it before I trust it. The floor should be usable this season, but I think he's just a backup. If he's on the waiver wire, I don't think you have to pick him up just because he's available. At 20, I also think Hunter Henry can remain on the waiver wire if you don't feel desperate at tight end. I feel like the position is kind of deep this season, and last year he was just a floor play. So while he was the top target for Drake Maye with Diggs incoming, that probably changes, and I would like to see the new Josh McDaniels offense before I endorse Henry as a weekly streamer. So no thanks, but if you want to bank just like 7 points, I think he's not a bad option to do that with. Kind of underrated in terms of floor options at tight end. At 21, I also think the floor is relatively safe for Geno Smith at tight end 21. I might be ranking him too low. Arthur Smith really likes him, so he should get some looks. I think DK Metcalf might have a rough game here, so Aaron Rodgers might need to lean on him in the screen game. So I actually like Geno as an option this season, but odds are he's still on the waiver wire, and I don't feel compelled to pick him up. I would like to see what the Steelers offense looks like before I endorse Geno as well. But last 4 tight ends, just names to keep on the watch list. There's no way you're starting them. Odds are you didn't draft them, but I do think Jatavion Sanders and Theo Johnson, these year 2 tight ends, will be a lot more involved than people expect. I think they could have the same value as guys like Brenton Strange and maybe even Dalton Kincaid. If you told me they finished the year as top 13 tight ends, I wouldn't be that surprised. But the difference between tight end 13 and tight end 22 is only like 2.5 points. So not a big deal. I'm not going to roster them, but if they have good games, they might be very good pickups off the waiver wire immediately in week 2. I think once the bye weeks come around, these guys are going to have very good streaming value off the bench. At 24, I also think Chig Okonkwo has some interesting value, but against the Broncos with a rookie quarterback making his debut, no thanks. I'm not going to trust him this week. And then Juwan Johnson, I also think does have some level of volume headed his way, but I'm definitely not trusting him. No thank you whatsoever. So those are my tight end rankings, the top 25. And lastly, let's talk about the defensive rankings. I have the Cardinals as the clear number 1 option this week. Versus Spencer Rattler is all I need to know. They made a lot of upgrades in the draft on defense, and I do think Will Johnson will lock up Chris Olave. So going to be rough for the Saints all year. The Cardinals have the best matchup to chase in week 1. They're a clear must start. At number 2, we have the Broncos versus Tennessee, who are going to be one of the best defenses overall this year. They get a rookie quarterback at home. Let's go. Going to be a very ugly game from the Titans side of the ball. At 3, I got the Jets versus the Steelers, and at 4, I have the Steelers in the same game. This is going to be a low-scoring game. I think the Jets win, actually, and Rodgers is notoriously bad in week 1 games the last 4 years, so I do think the Jets play well. They want some revenge. They had a lot of headaches with Rodgers in his tenure with them, so I think they step up. I think it's a very low-scoring game. I see a lot of turnovers as well in this matchup, a lot of punts at the very least. The Steelers, though, always play well, always a safe play. They do know Fields pretty well, but Fields, I think, can run the ball a little bit more. I think the Jets will score more points, and that's my only tiebreaker between them. I think both defenses in this game are top 5. I also think the Chargers and Chiefs are good starts this week, which is odd because a lot of people did not draft them. They're both top 10 from last year, and the Brazil environment is not something I want to bet on in terms of shootouts. So I think it's another choppy, low-score game. I see a lot of field goals by both teams here, and I think both defenses will step up with multiple turnovers. I do not trust either offense in Brazil. So I think it's a sneaky, 20-17 type of game here. I think both defenses are actually very safe plays. Maybe they don't score on defense. Maybe the upside isn't there, but I do think they will hold their opponents to less than 21 points. I don't see many touchdowns on the board for either team. So like the defenses in the Brazil game, I would start them tonight. And then at 7, I think the Bears are actually pretty interesting because I do not trust J.J. McCarthy at all. The Bears defense usually plays a lot better at home as well. And their new defensive coordinator was the Saints head coach last year. If there's any side of the ball he knows well, it is the defensive side. So I actually think he'll have a good game plan here. I do not trust J.J. McCarthy at all. And historically, they've locked up Jefferson when he plays in Chicago. He's not that involved. If that continues, then I do think McCarthy will have a very rough game here. So while I could be dead wrong, the Vikings offense could look amazing. I doubt it. I think the Bears are top 10 this week. I trust any defense going up against a quarterback making his rookie debut. That's usually a spot to trust. At number 8, I have the Patriots versus Las Vegas, and I think Vrabel will have the defense looking good right out the gate. The home field advantage, I think, should be a major factor here, and I think they bottle up Brock Bowers enough to where Ashton Genty does not move the needle. I don't think they get blown out. I think they hold the Raiders to less than 20 points as well. At number 9, I did rank the Eagles versus the Cowboys, and I didn't think Jalen Carter would get ejected, so that definitely played a factor here. They probably would have been much better at stopping the run than they were last night. So they didn't look very good, but they will bounce back pretty quickly. If not for the fumble recovery and the lightning delay, they would not have gotten bailed out. They barely cracked positive points. Not great, not a good ranking by me. So rough spot from them. They really disappointed. The Vic Fangio defense should look a lot better moving forward. I would not drop them, but last night was ugly. At number 10, I have the Vikings at Chicago, and similar argument to the Bears in this game. I think it's probably a low-scoring matchup in division. On Monday night, I can't say I fully trust Caleb Williams just yet, but I do think Ben Johnson knows the division well enough to have some good counters to the Vikings' disguised looks on defense. So I think they have a high floor. I don't think the Bears will blow them out, but I do think Caleb will be good enough to prevent them from being the better play in this matchup. So Vikings top 10, I think they also went kind of underrated. Odds are they're still on the waiver wire. Not that many people drafted them this season. Number 11, I have the Seahawks versus the Niners, and Niners on paper sound scary, but it's just like your memory of the Niners offense. I don't think they're actually that deadly, and I also think the Seahawks defense is very underrated. This is going to be a downgrade of a matchup for every opposing offense this year. The Seahawks have a very good defense, and I think they can finally get a win versus Brock Purdy at home. So I think they're top 12. I think I wanted to rank them top 5, but just couldn't do it. The Niners still have Kyle Shanahan, and their offense probably puts up at least like 20, 24 points in this home opener. I don't think they're the best start, but I do think they're a safe enough option to rank top 12. I also think the Texans are a good enough defense overall to rank top 12. I have them one spot above the Rams. This game, I think, will be very low scoring. I think the defenses are actually going to be a nightmare to handle on both sides of the ball. But I picked the Texans to win. I think they're more talented overall on that side. And I do think they're a very good acquisition all year. If the Texans are on my roster, I think I can compete. So at the Rams, not the best matchup to chase, but I think an underrated, very low scoring game. I don't think either team scores more than 3 touchdowns. So give me the Texans and the Rams as top 13 options. If you're in a pinch, if you did not draft well at defense, I do think you could pick them up and stream them if you needed to. At 14, I have the San Francisco 49ers at Seattle. I think in the division, they know Darnold well enough to kind of hold him back. And Robert Saleh is an interesting defensive coordinator. The weapons that they lost on that side of the ball this offseason are not encouraging, but I don't think this game is going to be a blowout in favor of the Seahawks. So I'm kind of worried about Kenneth Walker completely torching them, but I don't think the score will get out of hand. I think from a floor standpoint, they'll be okay, and maybe they can force some turnovers and pad the stats in fantasy. They're top 15, but probably not going to start them. And then 15 and 16, I think at this point, you're definitely benching all of these defenses, unless you're in a super deep format. Who is starting defenses outside the top 14? But the Commanders and Giants, I think that game is actually underrated to also be pretty low scoring. The Giants defense made some big upgrades, especially on the defensive line. I think that's going to be a tough team to handle, but the Commanders offense is pretty good. I don't want to bet against Jayden Daniels, and I do think they win. That's why I do rank the Commanders one spot above, but their defense is very old. I think they could start slow. Not many of their starters played in the preseason, so not dying to trust either team here, but I think both offenses could look pretty ugly. The low score is definitely possible in this division rivalry. The Packers-Lions game, another division rivalry that could be kind of ugly, but odds are turns more into a shootout than a low score. So I'm going to pass on both of them, but I do think the Packers are a good pickup. With Micah Parsons, they could be a weekly start once they hit that Browns game in week 3. I would like to put them in the lineup more often than not. I think they will finish top 10 on the season, but against the Lions, I'm not dying to trust him very much. And then the Lions have a new defensive coordinator. Even in division, even if it's a low score, I doubt they get many turnovers against the Packers in this one. So not going to trust him. I'm going to pass. And then that Bucks-Falcons game could turn into a massive shootout, but in division also could have some interesting turnover potential. They're top 20, but I'm not starting either NFC South defense in this matchup. So no thanks with the Bucs and the Falcons. Everybody else outside the top 20, not even considering them. These are my rankings at QB, tight end, and defense in week 1. I have a lot of faith in the top 3 quarterbacks. I think Baker and Kyler are elite plays. And then if not for draft capital and name value, I actually would have ranked Daniels and Burrow much lower. They have really bad averages in their recent history in these division matchups. Daniels might be just as bad as last year and not put up more than 2 touchdowns. The rushing value is the only thing that's saving him. And then Burrow plays very poorly against Cleveland historically as well. Those 2 players actually scare me quite a bit, but I don't think I can bench them. They're still top 7 in my rankings. But Bo Nix, Drake Maye, I think are very safe, high floor top 10 plays. And then I think Dak Prescott through Justin Fields are also pretty safe, high-end floor options. Gonna guarantee you at least 17, 18 points in your lineup. So that's not gonna burn you. I think there's no chance that they bust. Odds are they don't crush and put up like 25 points. But Bryce Young is my favorite streamer on the week outside the top 12. I'm worried about Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert in the Brazil game. I haven't seen enough from Penix, Flacco, Geno, or Caleb yet to fully trust, but those are the last guys I would consider in a super flex format. I'd be trying to bench Mahomes and Herbert in Brazil if it's just a 1 quarterback league. I think that's a very rough game to fully trust in terms of upside. But once we hit Daniel Jones outside the top 22, that's definitely bench territory. No thank you in a super flex format outside Caleb Williams. And then tight end, I think you're definitely starting McBride, Bowers, Kittle. That's a no-brainer. Njoku, Hockenson, and Andrews, I think, have very high upside this week. Love them in week 1. And then Engram, LaPorta, Kraft, and Warren, I think, are the other safe top 10 plays. Outside the top 10, though, I think it's kind of dicey and pretty risky. So good luck with guys like Kelce, Loveland, Kincaid, and Ertz. There's no way I'm starting Pitts or anyone after that, but maybe there's some upside I am underestimating. Maybe some touchdowns do bail you out. And then at defense, I think the top 7 are the ones I trust all the way through the Bears. I think there's a very good situation to be relying on in terms of fantasy production. I think they're all very safe starts in fantasy. But once we hit the Patriots at number 8, I think it starts to get pretty dicey. I would still feel somewhat confident in starting the top 13. I think the Patriots through the Rams are actually pretty tempting in fantasy this week. But starting with the Niners and Commanders, that's the point where it's probably just too many options to actually start. I doubt you're trusting anyone outside the top 13 at defense. So good luck to you. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll see you next time. I'll update all of my rankings with all the injury news and updates tomorrow on Saturday, like I always do. Ring the notification bell if you don't want to miss out. My name's Adam Riancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.